Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Naravira. So yeah, we had a lot of fun cooking up the programme for this year. I think it's fair to say last summer when we had a teachers meeting, it was Advaya Matti who started it. He said it's 2020, it's got to be vision. So from that unfolded, yes, let's look at vision and transformation as the theme for the year. And my talk this evening is called Introducing Action, a very important part of the process from vision to transformation. So yeah, we find it's really helpful to have a theme that kind of runs through the year, where we can ideally follow a teaching from the Buddha and then really look at how it applies to our own life. And this teaching on vision and transformation, the Buddha's Noble Eightfold Path, is a really fundamental teaching of the Buddha. I'm going to ask my beautiful assistant Taranita to pop a picture on the screen for you. And this is a picture of the Buddha when he was first teaching. So yeah, the Buddha was enlightened, they say, in May, and spent quite a few weeks absorbing his enlightenment experience. And then when it came to July, the full moon in July, that was the first turning of the wheel of the Dharma. And this was when he first taught his 5 friends, the 5 ascetics. And he taught the 3 lakshanas, which we've all come across in varying ways. Right from when we first start on the intro course, we learn about the 3 marks of conditioned existence. He taught the 4 noble truths, and the 4th of the 4 noble truths, the path that leads to the end of suffering. This is the Buddha's Noble Eightfold Path. So it takes us right back to that time with the Buddha, right at the beginning. And it was also right at the beginning for our teacher Sangha. In 1968, he founded our Buddhist order. So we could have our next picture. There we are. It's a bit blurry because it's not very big photo from 1968. And this is Sangha carrying out one of the first 12 ordinations into the Triratna Buddhist order. So I thought it'd be quite nice to have a picture of him as he was in 1968, because that was the year he gave a lecture series on the Buddha's Noble Eightfold Path. And you can still hear those lectures now. They're available on Free Buddhist Audio, and they're in the book, The Buddha's Noble Eightfold Path. So I'm just saying that because both for the teachings of the Buddha and for our own teacher, Sangha, this is a really fundamental aspect of the teachings. Yeah. So thanks, Taranita. I think we can leave the picture now. So yeah, the basic idea with the Eightfold Path is that we have a glimpse of vision. That's the first stage. It's a glimpse of a way of being that is free from suffering. It's also sometimes described as the 4th sight that the Buddha saw in the story of the Buddha's life. He saw old age, he saw sickness, he saw death. And then he sees this wandering holy man who's a 4th sight, a glimpse of something, of somebody who's traveling beyond that state of suffering. And we've all experienced that in some way. We use the word vision, but vision doesn't necessarily work for us because it's not necessarily a visual experience. It's an experience, and it's an experience that leads to transformation. But we might experience it more like a call, something calling us. It might be some strange kind of felt sense that leads us to explore meditation, for example. It might be a whiff. Some of us have a sense of almost like a perfume of something that leads us on, or a taste. The Buddha talks about the taste of freedom. So in whatever way we experience, there's something that's happened to each and every one of us, or we wouldn't be sitting here this evening. We wouldn't have made a step in the direction of practicing the teachings of the Buddha. But vision is only the first step. It's vital, it's crucial. But then there are another 7 stages of the path, and that's the path of transformation. And that's a way of saying that over time, we realize that vision. And I love that word, realize. If you think about it, what it means is to make real in our experience. to really allow that vision to manifest fully. Yeah, the next stages of the path are all about transformation, realizing the vision, and full and complete realization, obviously with the completion, absolute completion of the final stage of the path, is awakening or enlightenment. So the path can take us all the way from that first little glimpse. It might even be a bit like something quite gritty, a bit like the grit in an oyster that becomes the pearl. Vision isn't always comfortable, but it leads us on to act, to grow, to develop, ultimately the pearl of wisdom, possibly, potentially enlightenment, awakening. But it's worth saying, I think, that vision in this sense that the Buddha meant it, in this sense that Bhante meant it, is only truly vision as the first step of the Eightfold Path if it actually results in us taking some action. Otherwise, it's just an idea, a nice idea that came and went, like so many other nice ideas that have passed us by. Vision, a real experience of vision, is different from that. It's something that gets hold of us. There's a fantastic poem by Rilke that has that line at the end, "You must change your life." There's something that calls us to think, no, there's something more, something I want to move towards, something in me that wants to unfold. And we have these two images for the Eightfold Path. We have an image of a path and the image of it more as a lotus or a mandala. So I've got a little illustration of the Eightfold Path as a path, which I just found when I was looking on the internet earlier. It's quite an interesting one. There we are. So you've got the bottom, you've got the three universal truths, the three lakshanas the Buddha taught, and the four noble truths. And you've got this staircase, and you've got this monk making his way up this staircase to nirvana. So that's a very linear idea of the Eightfold Path as these different stages that we progress along. What's interesting, if you go back to the actual Sanskrit, for the Noble Eightfold Path, it's the Arya Ashtangika Marga. And this word in the middle, anga, actually means limbs. So it's not steps as in stages, although you can follow it in that way. It's much more like the limbs of a tree. So if we could have the next illustration, this is a beautiful image of the Eightfold Path that Yasmin made for us at the end of last year. And you can see each of the branches of the tree. You've got perfect vision, perfect emotion, perfect speech, perfect action, perfect livelihood, perfect effort, perfect awareness, and perfect samadhi. And there at the bottom, we've got the Buddha sitting at the base of the tree. And it's the whole process of vision and transformation. And these two images, the idea of it as a path and the idea of it as a tree that flowers in many branches, or a lotus, or perhaps a mandala, they're not either or. Sometimes we'll experience it as one, sometimes we'll experience it as another. Sometimes, for some of us temperamentally, we're much more strongly drawn to the one or the other. And I think it's great to recognize that, and also to recognize that for other people it's quite different. So it's all amounts to the same thing. Ultimately, it's all transformation. It's transformation in the light of that glimpse of perfect vision. So, yeah, I think we've got a closer up image, I think, of the tree that just helps you to be able to see a little bit more those different aspects. They all flow out from that central trunk, from the Buddha seated on the ground, taking his seat, really unfolding that glorious tree of enlightenment. Yeah. And I think there's one more image, Taranita, which is actually words. Is that right? Yeah, here we are. So this is how the stages of the Eightfold Path unfold, and how they're going to unfold in our exploration this year. So yeah, we've had an exploration of vision. That was our first term this year. And we also had the meditation course that wove in between that. And now we're moving on to this big section that I've coloured red, action. So those 5 stages in the middle: perfect emotion, perfect speech, perfect action, perfect livelihood, and perfect effort. That's what we're going to explore in our second term. focusing on action of body, speech and mind in various ways. I'll say a bit more about that in a minute, but it's really worth remembering. It's very important in the Buddhist tradition. These three ways are often referred to. It's there in the precepts. There are precepts of body, speech and mind. And to really address the whole of us, we need to engage body, speech and mind in our Dharma practice, in our Dharma lives. Again, we can sit and think beautiful thoughts forever, but actually if it doesn't translate into action, into skillful speech, into skillful acts of body, it's not really transformation. Yeah, so that's the red section is what we're going to be focusing on in this middle term of the year. And just to complete the picture, the last two stages of the path are 7 is awareness, that's a translation of sati, and the 8th is samadhi. There are many different ways of translating the word samadhi. In our exploration, come the autumn term, we're going to be exploring awareness and wisdom as the concluding stages of the Eightfold Path. Yeah. So, yeah, we're going to explore aspects, action this term in terms of 3 aspects. Actually, maybe there's one more slide. Is there, Taranita? Yeah, one more slide. So it's a bit, I've been thinking it's a bit like a plait, really. We've got these 3 strands that are going to interweave in this term's exploration. So we're going to be talking about ethics, ethical action, skillful action, really foundational, fundamental. We're also going to be talking about acts of body, speech and mind in terms of ritual and devotion. Yeah, that's a way in which we do engage more than just our minds. We speak in ritual, we engage in making physical offerings, in acts of ritual and devotion. And then we're also going to be exploring activism. Activism as an aspect, and more broadly altruism, that kind of activity which has in mind more than just ourselves, thinking about the wider world. Yeah. So I'll just say a little bit more about each of those. I think that's it for the slides now. Thank you. Yeah, so the foundation of the entire Dharma life, of the Buddha's enlightenment experience, is ethics. In terms of the Eightfold Path, we have perfect vision, and then the very next step is perfect emotion. And how do we cultivate perfect positive emotion? Or we cultivate it through skillful action, skillful acts of body, speech and mind. It's sometimes described, well, in the translations of the precepts, I purify my mind, I purify my speech, I purify my body. So ethics very much as a process of developing skillful positive mental states, and without that we can't act really skillfully. It's absolutely the bedrock. And when the Buddha taught, as well as teaching the Eightfold Path, he also taught a shorter version, which basically encompasses the same principle, which is a threefold path, which is something we look at on the intro course. And we start with ethics, there's meditation, and there's wisdom. And the idea is that ethical action in our everyday lives, in all those hours of the day when we're not meditating, it's all having an effect on our minds, and we need to be addressing our ethics in order to be able to, well, have a clear conscience in the best sense, so that we don't have things on our minds when we're meditating. Ethics is the basis for meditation practice. Ethics and meditation practice together are the basis for the development of wisdom. So ethics is right there as the first stage of the threefold path. And it's one of those things, it's very simple to say, but it's not very easy to do. There's that lovely verse from the Dhammapada that sums it up. Cease to do evil, learn to do good, purify the heart. Cease to do evil, learn to do good, purify the heart. There's a famous story in Bante's book about a monk visiting the Emperor of Japan who'd asked for the essence of the Buddha's teachings. He was quite disappointed when he heard that, because he said anyone could, child of 3 could understand that. And the monk said yes, but an old man of 80 still can't practice it. So it's simple, and yet takes a lot of action, a lot of effort. And it's simple in the sense that we need to learn to recognize what actions of body, speech, and mind lead to harm for us and others. We need to become aware of that. And having become aware of that, we need to resolve to change how that we act, so that we can realize our vision, so that we can make real our vision. The way we make our vision real is by, first of all, by addressing our ethical actions. However we want to develop ethics is at the foundation. So that's the first strand of our plat for this term. And then we come on to ritual and devotion. This is something that some of us take to very naturally and love, and some of us spend a long time thinking, what? Why do we need to do that? It can have all sorts of associations that are less helpful depending on what our upbringing has been. And I think it's really good to be clear about its place within our path of practice, our Dharma lives. And obviously we are going to be hearing more about this next week. It's powerful action. Acts of ritual and devotion have a strong positive effect on the body. We talk about karma. We often think in terms of avoiding creating unskillful karma, but there are things that we do that create very positive karma. Meditation is one of them, ethical practice is one of them, and ritual and devotional practice is another. They have an effect, a positive effect on our body, speech, and mind. And when we practice ritual and devotion, we're engaging all those aspects of ourselves. As I've said, we often chant verses, we make offerings, and we're often bearing in mind the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas that we're engaging with in the ritual. There's more as well. There's a really fundamental truth that we're plugging into when we practice ritual and devotion. We're enacting our recognition that we're not isolated entities. We're not little bubbles that haven't been conditioned by the beings around us, the beings of the past. And we're interconnected. There's an aspect of ritual and devotional practice which is about interconnectedness. In ritual, we also recognize that we're hearing and practicing the Dharma because we received it from the lineage of those who went before. We haven't come up with it ourselves. We've actually been in receipt of this extraordinary gift of the Dharma, of the truth of the Dharma. And there are many different ways of thinking of lineage. Obviously, we can think back through the beings. We can think back through Bhante Sangha, who founded our order, through his teachers, and their teachers, and their teachers, and their teachers. And that's one way of taking you back to our connection with the Buddha. And one of the things Bhante's offered us is another way of looking at lineage as well, that we have different lineages. There are lineages of teaching, lineages of practice, lineages of inspiration, and lineages of responsibility, people down the decades who've taken responsibility for creating contexts for people to practice in. All those are conditions that we can appreciate and reverence. It's an interesting word we can come back to again and again, and it's going to be an uncomfortable word, and it's a very rich word. So that's part of what we'll be exploring. And the other thing that ritual and devotion offers us is a very, again, I was going to say powerful alternative language, a language that can speak to different parts of us. We're very habituated in the West to, in the modern world, it's global, isn't it now? We're very habituated to the rational. We like things to be tidy and rational. We're brought up to appreciate and respect that. And that isn't all of us. It's only an aspect of us. It's a big aspect. But there is much more to us than that. We have mysterious depths. There is great energy in those mysterious depths of us that we learn to explore through meditation and also through practices like ritual and devotion. There's definitely more than the rational, and that's very well taken care of in the best sense, I think, with our ritual and devotional practices. And it has very positive consequences. When we practice ritual and devotion, it enables us to become more receptive to the flow of inspiration that comes from the Buddha, from the followers of the Buddha, from the archetypal beings who embody the qualities of the Buddha. And it can help us to deepen our connection with the Buddha and what we call the Arya Sangha. This is the Sangha of enlightened beings through time. Actually, it can be a huge source of inspiration, of solace, and a refuge in itself, this sense that there are beings who have so transformed through their Dharma practice that they have awakened. And making that connection real by really turning our care and attention, our acts of body, speech and mind to that, we can realize that in ourselves, and it can do a huge amount to support us in our practice, in our daily lives, this sense that, again, we're connected to something much bigger, much more. And it doesn't only strengthen our connection in that way, it also strengthens our connections with each other. When we share that practice, something happens. We're all connecting to the shared vision that we share with the Buddha, that we also share with each other. It manifests in different ways, but the heart of it, that commitment to recognizing and realizing what is a true refuge, to awakening, to really allowing our full potential to unfold, that's something we share with each other, and we deepen that recognition of sharing that by practicing devotional practices together. So coming to the third aspect of our three strands of action, it's activism, which is more broadly also altruistic activity. And altruistic activity is vital. It's vital for our own development, and it's also vital for the benefit of beings. We are interconnected, and we can get so caught up in our own problems, our own little world. Actually, when we reach out and we recognize that we can connect through activity that benefits other beings, that has such a positive effect, 360 degrees all the way around, completely. And that kind of activity, that activism, that altruism, it needs to be rooted in ethical practice so that it can be truly skillful. And it needs to be accompanied by the development of wisdom. And I think this is where we see that a teaching like the Noble Eightfold Path gives us a really good nutritional mix. Yeah, it gives us lots of different elements that work to support each other, because it's vital, as I say, to engage in altruistic activity, in activism. And it certainly is what the Buddha did. Naravira was talking about the Buddha as activist. It's one of the themes we've been talking about and exploring in the team. And he certainly was active. He was very, very active in wanting to share what he'd realized with as many people as possible in the 50 years of his life after he gained enlightenment. All those thousands of miles he's walked, all those hours and hours of teaching, he wanted to benefit beings in whatever way. He wanted to change the world in that way so that people could wake up, be free. And whatever kind of altruistic activism we're going to engage in, we also need to develop wisdom alongside that. To the extent that we haven't realized wisdom, our actions are going to be limited. And not only are our actions going to be limited, but there's also that possibility that we might burn out if we've got wrong views about what we're doing and how we're doing it, if we lack the wisdom to to realize we can have an effect in the world, but we can't control what happens in the world. We can play our part in it, but we need to learn how to dance that dance between virya, energy in pursuit of the good, it sometimes describes spiritual energy, and also patience, to know where we can act skillfully, have an effect, and where we need to pause, either to recharge our batteries or to just recognize that there's a bigger process at work that we can't control, the whole unfolding of conditionality. Our actions are significant, but life has inevitable difficulties. No one can control it all. This is something we're going to be exploring in a couple of weeks. Yeah. So we just felt it would be a rich and potent combination to bring together this exploration of the very practical, altruistically oriented teaching of the Buddha that was so evident in how he lived his life, to bring that together with looking at his fundamental teachings on ethics and also looking at our own relationship, our completely interconnected relationship with the Buddha and with all beings. So these are our 3 strands for this next 3 months. We're moving from vision to transformation. And we're going to go into groups shortly. And yeah, there's some questions for you to consider. Thinking about these 3 strands, ethics, ritual and devotion, and activism, altruism, which aspect of those most appeals to you? Which aspect most appeals to you? And also, which aspect least appeals to you? Which one, maybe you even feel some aversion to one of them. And why might that be? What does that tell you? That's the questions that I want to leave you with. Yeah, so that you can have a ponder and have a talk in the small groups that we're going to divide into shortly.